Hello, language arts flex class students. Here we are, week 5. Okay. Hopefully, you're not tired of my videos already. I hope you have a lot of other exciting things going on in other classes. And I hope this is kind of blending in a little bit for you with some of your studies. Again, I'm enjoying having you as part of the class. And I look forward to your feedback. I look forward to asking questions if you have any. Like, truly, be as interactive as you're comfortable being. So, what are we doing today? 1914 to 1946. I'm not going to do a lot of historical overview because I think most of you have studied this time period in history quite a lot. And I don't necessarily want to go into a lot of details on the two world wars during this time. Because again, I think you've studied them. I think you can look those up on your own. I will start with something a little bit more positive. 1914. By encouraging and supporting Panama's push for independence from Colombia, the United States ultimately succeeded in building the Panama Canal, which opened to traffic in 1914. So look it up if you can't picture the Panama Canal, but it made it to where instead of going all the way around South America to get to the West Coast or get from the West Coast to the East Coast, we could cut through a canal and it shortened our travel time by boat. So that's something interesting that you can look up. Look at a picture of the Panama Canal. It's fascinating. And of course, 1914 to 1921, we had World War One. Then 1929 to 1940, we had the Great Depression in the United States. Very hard economic times all the way around for most classes of people. I mean, you still had some of the upper class that were surviving much easier than everybody else, but even they lost quite a bit during this time. And then 1939 to 1945, you have World War II. So, a lot of heaviness, a lot of turmoil during this time. I mean, there was still positive things going on, a lot of positive technology, literature. There was other movements in the United States going on, of course, but you can see that this is a heavy time in the life of the global community and the life of people in the United States. And so, what's going on in literature? We have something called modernism. It emerged in Europe and the United States in the early years of the 20th century and presented a sense of modern life through art as breaking from the traditions and styles of the past. Yeah, this is a new age. This is a new time. The world is changing. The world was booming with new thoughts in science and technology, and the world was more mechanized. And so artists and writers were picking up on this and wanting to break free of traditions and explore new styles, new avenues for art. Henry James, William Faulkner, and many other American writers experimented with fictional points of view. Uh, and some authors are still doing this, of course. This is not something that necessarily just ended. Henry James often limited the information given to the reader to what a single character would have known instead of using omniscient narrators. That was different. And you're thinking, so what's the big deal about that? It was just a totally different style. We saw the world through just one character, and we didn't know what else was going on. Faulkner's novel, The Sound and the Fury, 1929, breaks up the narrative into 4 sections, each giving the viewpoint of a different character, including a boy with intellectual challenges. I will tell you, it's a little bit difficult to read. It's not one of my favorite of Faulkner's, but it's really a strong literary piece. It's fascinating the way he did this, and the approaches that he takes are fascinating. It takes getting used to reading the book from these 4 points of view. Gertrude Stein developed an abstract prose poetry style, often compared to abstract artists such as Pablo Picasso. So Stein claimed the comparison and agreed with the comparison. So look up some artwork by Picasso and then picture writers trying to do the same thing. Bring a fresh perspective, bring a fresh voice to literature. Here's some other poets. I want you to look up some of these. Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, Robert Frost, Wallace Stevens, William Carlos Williams. Take a minute. Like, if you're really into getting to know literature of the time, go to just just go to Google and Google poetry of, and you can find some of these. All of these have some poems out there. Just look them up. Totally different styles. And to you, they will seem like, oh, this is old poetry. We don't write poetry like this anymore. But the techniques were different. The voice was different. The approach to poetry was different. Here are some other poets. E. Cummings. E. Cummings, we're going to talk a little bit about E. Cummings next week. E. Cummings, I know where I'm going to kind of overlap some of these. I'm going to talk about Langston Hughes next week too. I know I'm kind of overlapping the times a little bit. But Hart Crane, Marianne Moore, Prose, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, William Faulkner, Sinclair Lewis, John Dos Passos, John Steinbeck. Look up these people. Look, just an overview. I don't want to sit here and just read to you what you can look on Google for yourself. And I want you to pick what your interest level is. I don't expect everybody to just delve into this and read pages and pages of biographical information on each one of these, but look up a little, at least go to Wikipedia or someplace and look up a little information about these. They have fascinating lives. You would be surprised at how interesting the life of some writers could be. And so if you're really wanting to get a good overview, besides just hearing these names, go look up an overview of some of these. Now, during this time, there's also something called the Harlem Renaissance. It was an intellectual and cultural revival of African American music, dance, art, fashion, literature, theater, politics, and scholarship in the Harlem neighborhood of Manhattan in New York City. And it was during the 20s and 30s. And this was a huge time for Black artists, Black dancers, Black writers to really become known in the larger cultural sense of the arts. And it was a booming time for these arts. Here are some of the writers of that time in the Harlem: Jean Toomer, Richard Wright, Zora Neale Hurston. We're going to talk about Hurston some a little bit next week also. But look up the Renaissance, the Harlem Renaissance. Some of the art, some of the dance videos are just amazing. And of course, it was the 20s and 30s. So to us now, it'll look a little bit older, it'll look a bit dated. But it was fascinating that this neighborhood gave voice to the people that were living there and a cultural expression of who they were as people, as artists, as Americans. Who I'm focusing on mainly today is Ernest Hemingway. I will tell you that all through high school, Ernest Hemingway was one of my favorite writers. My all time favorite writer is Pat Conroy, who passed away 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I don't know, it's been a little while. But I always was fascinated about Ernest Hemingway and Ernest Hemingway's writing style. Hemingway was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1954. Was best known for his language that seems simple and natural, but has deeper meanings. And I think I like Hemingway because that's a little bit of how I write. He reveals the tip of the iceberg, leaving us to discover what is first unseen. It's going to drive me crazy if I don't edit this when I go. Tip of the iceberg. Look at this picture and you see what we mean. See that tip of the iceberg that's above the water? That's what most people can see. That's what Hemingway puts in his books. He was like, you figure out all of the rest of this. The largest part of the iceberg is underwater. So the largest part of Hemingway's thoughts are unsaid in his books, but they're hinted at. Hemingway wants the reader to delve into it, I've used that word a lot today, delve into. I wonder why that's my vocabulary of the week. To really connect with the characters and the settings and the plots to make them a part of us so we can put ourselves in those situations, in those settings, meet those characters, say, how are we like them? How are we different? And really come up with our own questions and answers from what he hints at in his literature. He doesn't want to just write a 1,000-page book and say, here, I'll just tell you every detail. He wants to spark our imagination. Wants to remind us that a quick glance at a situation is never enough to know the whole story. So he has a reason for doing this. It's not just his writing style. He's purposely telling us, hey, you might think you know somebody, but there's a lot that you don't know. You may think you know a group of people, but there's a lot that you don't know about a setting, about a plot, about a character. What a fascinating life. He was a war reporter. After the United States entered World War One, he joined a volunteer ambulance unit in the Italian army. I know that sounds odd, but he served at the front and he was wounded and spent a long period of time in the hospitals recovering. He really wanted to go to the front, but he did it as an ambulance unit and he did it with the Italian army. He felt like that he uh, had more freedom to go into the areas that he wanted to go into in the front. After his return to the United States, he became a reporter for Canadian and American newspapers and returned to Europe to cover the Greek Revolution and the Civil War in Spain. Now, during World War II, he made his way to London as a journalist. He actually flew several missions with the Royal Air Force and crossed the English Channel with American troops on D Day. So, go back to history if you don't remember D Day, huge invasion. Uh, he he was there. Attaching himself to the 22nd Regiment of the 4th Infantry Division, he saw a good deal of action in Normandy and in the Battle of the Bulge. He also participated in the liberation of Paris. Now, remember, he didn't have to be at any of these places. He was not in the military officially, he was a journalist, but he chose to be there. He chose to see things firsthand. He really wanted to know firsthand what certain situations were like, and not just standing by. I mean, he really was also taking somewhat of an active role. He used Paris as a writing base for many years, but he also traveled widely. He was into skiing, bullfighting, fishing, and hunting. And by then, it had become a part of his life and formed the background for a lot of his writing. You can tell by this picture, he truly wrote wherever he was. He was first and foremost a writer. He took paper and pencil with him. He had foldable tables, portable chairs, tents. Anywhere that he went, he wrote and he came back and published. So that is his dedication to his art and his career as a writer. I think that was another reason I'm fascinated by him because I love to do that. I love to write just wherever I am. Key West and cats. He lived in Key West during part of his life. Ernest Hemingway was given a white, six-toed cat. That's very unusual for a cat to have six toes by a ship's captain. And some of the cats who live on the museum grounds are still descendants of this original cat. The original cat was named Snow White. If you go to Key West, you can see the Ernest Hemingway Home and Museum. It has approximately 60 six-toed cats. Cats normally have 5 front toes and 4 back toes, just in case you're curious. I don't know why that fascinates me. Just one of those little odd trivia facts that is fun to know about the writer. But he did, there's so much depth to Ernest Hemingway. And I think back to the iceberg theory, okay, and Ernest Hemingway, I don't pick these writers because they're perfect or we should hold them up as some kind of example to live by. He had a very rough life part of the time. He struggled with alcohol part of the time. They say he also had a little bit of a temper. And so I'm not holding these writers up as let's all be like Hemingway, but To understand the person behind the writer is our goal to look and say, how did they come up with this literature? And carry it forward today. You don't have to have a passion for the same things that Hemingway did or any of the other, Jack London or anybody else. But if there's something that you have a passion for, Hemingway did show us how to follow through and be dedicated to that passion, that art. He wrote every day. He he said this is the only way that you can succeed. And so there are things about each of these writers' life that I picked that we can still look and say, ah, I can learn something from Hemingway. Here are some of his quotes. If I started to write elaborately, or like someone introducing or presenting something, I found that I could cut that scroll work or ornament out and throw it away and start with the first true, simple declarative sentence I had written. That goes back to his simplicity of writing. He says there's a lot of things that we write that we can cut out. We can simplify it and leave a lot of things to the imagination of the reader. I like this one too. All you have to do is write one true sentence. Write the truest sentence that you know. Hemingway wrote about things that he knew and experienced and felt and believed and tried to understand. And he tried to present them beautifully and truthfully and with integrity. I decided that I would write one story about each thing that I knew about. I was trying to do this all the time I was writing, and it was good and severe discipline. That's what I was talking about. I think discipline is one of the things that we can take from Hemingway and ask ourselves if we have that same discipline toward anything that we're passionate about. He was determined. He didn't let anything stop him from writing, and it was what he wanted to do. When people talk, listen completely. Don't be thinking what you're going to say. Most people never listen. That goes into really listening. When he traveled with the military, when he traveled with bullfighters, when he went to the bullfighting arenas, and again, I'm not a fan of bullfighting. I'm not a fan of, this was a different time back then. So some of the things that he did are not things that I would necessarily stand up and say, let's do. He was a big game hunter. That was before we understood the effects of the animal population and how we were actually causing harm to our environment. So I'm not holding him up in some, that's cool, let's go do this kind of thing. But he traveled and actually met these people and lived with these people and got to know people who fished, people who did all kinds of um, careers, who were in nature, who battled the natural world and its forces sometimes. And he said, listen to people. Most of the time, we're thinking about what we're going to say. So, most of the time, if we're having a conversation, instead of letting you finish, I'm already thinking of an answer. That's natural for most of us. We are not natural listeners. And Hemingway is saying, if you want to really understand something, you've got to stop and listen. Just stop. Just catch yourself. If you catch yourself thinking of an answer already, stop and refocus on what the person in front of you is saying. In order to write about life, first you must live it. As a writer, you should not judge, you should understand. So he's saying, don't bring judgment to your characters. Just understand your characters. Let the reader decide, what they want to think about the characters. Okay, subject verb agreement and collective nouns. Grammar review. Of course, you say, I know this. I learned this in first grade. Singular subjects take a singular verb, plural subjects must take plural verbs. Let's really look at it though. Present tense verbs ending in S are singular. So here we have the dog eats. We have the article, the singular subject, dog, and the singular verb eats. The ant crawls, the boat sinks. Okay, basic grammar, but we're not done yet. Of course, it gets more complicated than this. Any point that you need to stop this video, stop, take notes, Go back and look at it again. This messes us up sometimes as writers. Prepositional phrases. Prepositional phrase is a 2 to 4 word phrase, sometimes more, that begins with a preposition above, among, at, below, beneath, between, in, of, over, to, or under. A verb must agree with its subject, not the object of the prepositional phrase, which often comes between the subject and the verb. So the boxes of cereal are on the shelf. Since of is a preposition, we ignore the prepositional phrase of cereal. Boxes is plural, which agrees with the plural verb are. You have to find the subject of the sentence. The boxes are under the table. The cereal is cinnamon and sugar. The boxes of cereal are. So here we have cereal is, and here right next to it, a lot of people want to put cereal is again, but the subject of the sentence is boxes. Boxes are. The boxes of paper under the table are his. You got to go back and say the subject is boxes, and so the verb has to be are. What about collective nouns? Are they singular? Are they plural? What do we do with those collective nouns? A collective noun is a word or phrase that represents a group of people or things, but is treated as a singular unit. But guess what? As all grammar rules, that can be broken. They can also be plural nouns. So let's look at some. Group. A group is. Here, group is singular because we're going to treat it as a unit. A team is eating pizza in the lobby. The teams are headed for the locker room. So there's more than one team. So instead of using is, we're going to use are. Let's look at this though. When all the members, now you're going to probably have to pause this and reread this a couple of times. I always have to stop and think about this. When all the members of a collective noun are performing as a unit, it's a singular verb. The orchestra plays one concert in the park every summer. So you got all of these people that are part of one orchestra. So it's orchestra plays. The orchestra plans. The cast is practicing. So it's a lot of people, but they're acting as one unit. But what if we have those same words, but it's plural sometimes? That's because the members are doing things not together. Look up here, the orchestra plays. They're all sitting in their chairs playing at the same time. They're one unit. They're doing what the director is saying. They're acting as one unit. But here we have a plural pronoun. So this tells us that these people are all doing things individually. So it's the orchestra are packing up their instruments. They're doing it all at a different time, all in a different way, and all in a different place. The cast are looking for their costumes in local thrift stores. They're not going as one unit, they're going individually. So here we have cast is up here. Here we have cast are down here. Our staff work hard to reach their monthly goals. They're all doing it differently. That can be complicated. Just stop and think about it. Just process it. If they're doing it all together, it's singular. If they're all doing it individually, it's plural. What if I say a singular unit and a plural noun? The mob of students. Is it is or are headed to the front of the building? We would say the mob is, because people are acting as one if they're a mob. Or we say the students are. But remember, if it's this prepositional phrase, we ignore this. We go to the subject is mob, the mob is. The orchard makes a great setting for the movie. Apples make, but here we would say the orchard full of apples. Orchard is the subject, So we go back and act like that prepositional phrase isn't there and we say makes. If I confused you on this, just reread it. There's some logic to it. You have to think about it. Okay, here's your writing part for the day. I'm going to reload a Writing Longer Academics paper guideline. You have an optional assignment for this class to write a 5-page paper. So you're like, optional? No way I'm doing this. But here's the deal. If you look, I'm going to walk you through it step by step by step. Every week, a different thing is going to be due. So it's not like I'm just tossing you out and going, okay, write a 5-page paper. Good luck with that. Turn it in at the end. I am going to literally walk you through step by step by step of every single paragraph of writing this paper. So I hope you take me up on the challenge because you're going to have a lot if you choose, especially if you choose college, you're going to have a lot of papers due in life. If you get some practice, they become easier. It's just like math, science, anything. The more you do it, the more you become familiar with it. Here's what's due: 5 pages plus a page for works cited, at least 4 academic sources. That means not Wikipedia. That means not just somebody's blog who's not even in the field. It means it has to be somebody who works in the field, writes in the field, a literary critic, a historian, somebody. It could be somebody's blog if they're a historian or if they're a literary critic, but it just can't be somebody who's just saying, I read this book and it's great. 12-point Times New Roman font, double spaced, in text citations, which again, I'm going to show you what that means. Okay, I'm truly going to walk you through this step by step by step. It's it's great to have practice. I highly encourage you to do this, but truly no judgment. If you're writing another paper for another class, you can incorporate that in and I'll give you feedback on that paper instead of what I'm asking you to write. If you get in the middle and you just get tied up with it and you don't finish, there's no judgment. This is a judgment-free zone as far as that is concerned, okay? Do not feel stressed. Do not feel like you're going to disappoint me if you don't do this and therefore quit participating in class. No, I just want to encourage you to try it because again, the more you practice, the better you'll be for future papers. But if you have writing papers, here's the biggest thing I can encourage people to do. Remember that you're analyzing a person or an event. You're not just retelling it. A history paper in elementary school is telling in chronological order what happened day 1, day 2, day 3. We just retell it. Or a biography, so and so was born on December 8th, 1912. When they were young, they did this, and we just retell it. That's a biography. But when you're doing this, you're asking, how did this person bring change in the world for good or bad? What contributions have they made to society? What started this event? If we're talking about an event, what started this event? How did this event bring change to the world? And for us, we're going to be looking at it through literature terms. Your thesis statement is going to reveal your questions and the answers you're going to prove in your paper. You're like, okay, you already lost me. No. If I am going to talk about Leonardo da Vinci, I am going to not just retell Leonardo da Vinci's life. I'm going to talk about Leonardo da Vinci's art in the first section, science in the second section, and architecture in the third section. And each one of those, I'm going to talk about how Leonardo da Vinci changed the world through those 3 topics. So there you go. See, it doesn't have to be hard or complicated. If I talk about the Wright brothers, I'm writing a history paper. I'm going to talk about their early experiments in the bicycle shops and the influences that they had there. I'm going to talk about their early years in aviation and what led them to the Kitty Hawk flight. And then I'm going to talk about their innovations in the aircraft industry that made changes that affected how the public had access to airplanes. So there's 3 things I'm going to talk about the Wright brothers. I'm not just going to put it in chronological order. I'm going to talk about those 3 parts of their life in the 3 main bodies of the paper. So it doesn't have to be overwhelmingly challenging. A lot of times we're like, oh, this is so hard. I know it's hard. Like, I remember that feeling. It until you do several papers, it seems overwhelming to write a 5-page paper. But we're gonna outline it together. You're gonna have an introductory paragraph, which I'm gonna teach you how to write one week. You're gonna have the first point, the second point, the third point, and a conclusion. See how easy that can be? It does not have to be overwhelming. This week, all I want you to do, again, I'll be walking you through the entire paper project. This is optional for the class. If you choose to write this paper, you don't have to do the smaller weekly assignments. Woohoo! You don't have to do both. If you choose to do this week, pick a topic from the list and begin research. This paper will be an overview of one period in American literature: the Harlem Renaissance, Romanticism in American literature, or realism in American literature. So you're going to talk about your outline, go back. Your introductory paragraph, let's say, will be about Harlem Renaissance. Your first point can either be one aspect of it or one author who wrote during that time. And it can be author or artist. We don't have to do pure literature. Your second one will either be a second point that you find interesting about the Harlem Renaissance or a second artist, and then your third point or third artist. Same thing with Romanticism or realism in American literature. So you could do 3 different artists and writers under one of these. You're only choosing one of these. I will help you with research. When you tell me your topic, I will help you find some links to do your research. Okay? You are going to, here's what I recommend. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. I'm going to share my whiteboard. Start a Google Doc. Name your Google Doc. Um, let's say you're doing romanticism, just call it romanticism research 2022. I always put the year because sometimes years later you find it and you're like, when did I write this? So the first thing you do is you find a great website, post the website link so you can go back to it. You do research, website link 1, website link 2, cut and paste some things under there. Um, it's not cheating to cut and paste it in your research. It's only cheating if you cut and paste it and put it in your paper and don't put quotation marks around it and tell us where you got it. So, as you're doing research, if you find some ideas, give us a little bit so you remember what's under each website. You don't have to cut and paste everything you do, but if you're doing research and you can't find this this link here, you're not going to know what to do. Let's see if I can copy this. Okay, so send questions. I'm sure we're going to have some questions. Let me know what's going on. Give me feedback on what's challenging about this for you. Again, you can either do the smaller writing assignments or you can do this. You do not have to do both. Okay? So let me hear from you. Hope you have a good week.